The smell of October in Pondera County is the smell of cold coming to stay. It is not the sharp cold of January, not yet. It is the cold that moves in slow, the way a river rises, pressing against the skin of the morning like a hand laid flat against a window. The benchland north of Conrad stretches in every direction, under a sky the color of old bone. And the cottonwoods along the Marias River have gone the color of a struck match, yellow-orange, trembling, almost used up. Something in the grass has already died and something in the grass is still holding on. And the two things look exactly alike from the road. A parcel of 480 acres sat out there that October morning in 1973, and the men who wanted it did not agree on what it was for. Wade Garrison Sr. was 71 years old. His hands were the color and texture of the land itself. Creased at the knuckles, brown from decades of sun, the left thumb bent at an angle that no doctor had ever straightened. He had been saving newspaper clippings about that parcel for 11 years. He drove his 1966 Ford pickup into Conrad before first light. What none of them knew was that the mining company's $180,000 was about to become the wrong number, and that the right number had been sitting in an old ledger, booked since 1908, written in pencil by a man who had been dead for 19 years. If this story means something to you, if you have ever watched a piece of land that belonged to your people get turned into something your people would not recognize, subscribe to this channel and leave a comment below telling us where you are watching from and what the land means to the people who raised you. We read every one. The parcel had a name before it was a parcel. The Garrison family called it the River Quarter, though it ran to nearly 480 acres and was no single quarter of anything official. It lay along the south bend of the Marias River in Pondera County, Montana, rolling benchland mostly, with a crease of coulee cutting the northeast corner, a place where the grass came in thicker than anywhere else on account of the snowmelt that drained there each April. Wade's grandfather, Elias Garrison, had first put cattle on the river quarter in 1907, the year before Montana became anything like modern, the year before the ledger began. Elias was a compact man from North Dakota who spoke rarely and moved quickly and believed that land, properly attended, would outlast any single human intention. His one signature line, repeated to Wade's father, then to Wade himself, the way a prayer gets repeated, was this: "The grass will come back if you let it rest." He said it the way other men said grace. The Garrison family ran Hereford cattle on the river quarter from 1907 through 1947. The operation was called the Two Bench Ranch, founded formally in 1911 on 1,047 acres, including the river's quarter, which the family leased from the state on a rolling agricultural agreement. They ran between 180 and 240 head in the good years. In the dry years, 1919, 1934, 1936, they ran fewer and watched the hills go pale. The farmhouse on the main property, 4 miles south, had a doorframe in the kitchen that showed the waterline from the flood of 1916, a brown stain at hip height that no paint had ever fully covered. Wade's grandmother refused to paint over it. She said a house ought to remember what had happened to it. In 1948, Elias's son Clyde Garrison, Wade's father, lost the lease on the river quarter. The details were not romantic. There was a drought, and there was debt, and there was a man from the county assessor's office who came twice, and then came a third time with paperwork. The state reclaimed the parcel under a lapsed agricultural lease provision. Clyde Garrison signed what he was given to sign. He was 58 years old that day, and he drove home and sat in the kitchen for a long time without speaking. And when Wade's mother Ruth set a plate in front of him, he did not eat from it. The river quarter reverted to state inventory. It sat unclaimed for 25 years. Northwest Mineral Corporation was headquartered in Calgary, Alberta. The man they sent to Montana in the autumn of 1973 was named Gerald Pratt, a field acquisitions representative, mid-40s, wearing a clean canvas coat and carrying a clipboard. He was not loud about what Northwest Mineral intended to do. He attended 2 county commission, meetings and spoke in the careful, level language of environmental impact assessments and phased extraction schedules. He used phrases like regional economic contribution and responsible surface management and post-extraction reclamation plan. He did not raise his voice. He nodded when other men spoke. He thanked people by name when they asked him questions, even when the questions were hostile. He was not cruel. That was almost the worst part. Gerald Pratt had identified bentonite clay deposits beneath the river quarter, a seam running at roughly 14 feet below surface across an estimated 310 acres of the parcel. Northwest Minerals Geological Survey, completed in the spring of 1973, placed the value of that seam at approximately $4 million at current market prices. The extraction plan called for surface stripping across the deposit zone, which would have removed the benchland grass entirely and pushed overburden to the river margin. The Marias, which ran cold and clear through that bend, would have received the runoff from the stripped face. Nobody at Northwest Minerals' Calgary office had spent a night on the Marias River. Nobody there had eaten a meal prepared from anything grown within 50 miles of that bend. Wade Garrison's cousin Margaret went to one of the county commission's meetings. She spoke for 3 minutes about the family's history on the river quarter. Gerald Pratt listened with his pen resting on his clipboard. The commission chairman thanked her and said that the auction would proceed as scheduled under state land disposition rules. Margaret sat down. An older woman behind her, a neighbor, Pearl Dillard, whose husband had run sheep on adjacent land for 30 years, leaned forward and said quietly, "Honey, that's just how things are now." Wade was 60 years old the day he stopped waiting. That was 1962. He had read a small notice in the Conrad Courier about him, a state land inventory review that listed the river quarter among parcels under evaluation for commercial disposition. He cut the notice out with a kitchen knife and put it in a manila envelope. Over the next 11 years, he cut out 34 more notices, assessments, survey announcements, and commission agenda items. He kept the envelope in the drawer beneath the phone. He also kept, in the same drawer, his father's grazing ledger, a narrow cloth-bound book, 6 inches by 9, filled with Clyde Garrison's pencil entries from January 1908 through October 1947. Every entry recorded the date, the head count, the pasture rotation, the condition of the grass, the weather, and the river level. 39 years and 10 months of continuous, documented agricultural use on a specific parcel of state land. The ledger was not a dramatic object. It was a record book. That was what made it matter. In the late summer of 1963, Wade had gone to the Pondera County Library in Conrad and asked the librarian, a quiet woman named Edna Halverson, if there were any books on Montana land law and state auction procedure. She came back with 2 things: a copy of the Montana Code annotated from 1961, and a small volume called Agricultural Land Tenure in the American West, published in 1954 by a professor at Montana State College named R.G. Kimball. Wade read both. He read them, slowly, the way his grandfather had moved, with attention and without hurry. In the Kimball book, in a footnote on page 211, he found a reference to a 1929 Montana statute governing state land auctions. The statute established a preferential bidding clause for parcels with documented continuous agricultural use. A qualified prior use claimant could exercise a right of precedence at the legal minimum bid, provided documentation of that use met specific evidentiary standards, namely, written records covering a period of not less than 20 consecutive years on the specific parcel in question. Clyde Garrison's ledger covered 39 years and 10 months. Wade set the Kimball book down on the library table. He looked at the window. He picked the book back up and read the footnote again. He felt something he had not felt in a long time. Not hope exactly, something quieter and more durable than hope. He felt curious. He wanted to know if it was real. Over the next 10 years, Wade Garrison worked the way his grandfather had worked. Methodically, without announcement, not waiting for anyone's permission or encouragement, Every Sunday morning, before the light came full, he sat at the kitchen table in his small house on 4th Street in Conrad and reviewed what he had. He organized the ledger entries against the county plat records. He wrote letters to the state land office and the county assessor requesting confirmation of parcel boundaries. He read everything Edna Halverson could find him. He wrote to a professor at Montana State University in Bozeman, a man named Earl Dries in the Agricultural Economics Department, and asked about the 1929 statute. Dries wrote back 2 weeks later and said the statute was still on the books, that it had never been formally repealed, that it had been invoked perhaps twice in his knowledge, both times unsuccessfully because the claimants lacked sufficient documentation. 2 times, both unsuccessful. Wade had the ledger. The technical setback came in 1968. He hired a Chouteau attorney named Renfro to prepare the precedent's claim documents, and Renfro discovered that the county plat records had been resurveyed in 1953, and the river quarter's parcel number had changed. The new number did not match the parcel number referenced in Clyde's ledger entries. Renfro said the mismatch might invalidate the claim. The statute required documentation tied to the specific parcel, and, if the parcel numbers didn't match, the state could argue discontinuity of identity. Wade drove to the county seat and spent 4 days in the assessor's archive, going through survey records by hand, until he found the 1953 resurvey document, which explicitly noted that parcel 1477R was a renumbering of the previously designated parcel 9-44C, the number in his father's ledger. He had Renfro attach the resurvey document to the precedence claim as Exhibit B. The physical setback came in the winter of 1971. Wade suffered a cardiac event. Not a full heart attack, the doctor said, but a warning, and Wade was told to reduce his activity. For 6 weeks he could not do much. He sat in the kitchen. He read. He thought about the 480 acres along the Marias and whether the grass was still coming back the way his grandfather said it would if you let it rest. It had been resting for 23 years. He believed it was coming back. The social setback was quieter and lasted longer. Around Conrad, among the men who gathered at the Rexall drugstore counter in the mornings, Wade Garrison had acquired a reputation by 1970 that was not entirely kind. They called him Ledger Wade. It was not said with warmth. It meant a man who had spent his retirement chasing a legal ghost. A man who believed an old book could beat a mining company with $4 million in the ground. The men at the drugstore counter were not bad men. They had simply lived long enough to watch a great many lost causes stay lost. One morning, a rancher named Hal Brennan said, directly to Wade's face, "You know they're just going to write a bigger check, Ledger Wade." Wade drank his coffee. He set the cup down without spilling it. He left a quarter on the counter and walked out. The mentor came in the form of Earl Dries, the Montana State professor. In the spring of 1972, Dries drove up from Bozeman to Conrad, a journey of roughly 200 miles, and sat at Wade's kitchen table for 2 hours. He had a copy of a 1931 Montana Supreme Court decision, Halverson v. State Land Board, in which the precedence clause had been argued but not ruled upon because the claimant had died before the hearing concluded. Dries gave Wade the copy. He said, "The clause has never been ruled unconstitutional. It has only never been fully tested." Then Dries drove back to Bozeman. Wade did not hear from him again. Every Sunday, morning through 1972 and into 1973, Wade sat at the kitchen table before full light and reviewed the documents: the ledger, the resurvey exhibit, the Halverson decision, the Kimball book, the letters from the state land office. He drank his coffee. He watched the light come up over the benchland toward the Marias. He did not talk about it much. The auction was held in the Pondera County Courthouse on October 11, 1973. It was a state land disposition auction, administered by a deputy from the Montana Department of State Lands named Clive Sorensen. Gerald Pratt was there with 2 other men from Northwest Mineral. Wade Garrison arrived alone, carrying a leather briefcase his father had owned, and took a seat in the 3rd row. The room held perhaps 40 people. When the river quarter, parcel 1477R, 480 acres, Pondera County, was called. Sorensen opened bidding at the legal minimum of $612, which was the state's assessed value at $1 or $275 per acre. Wade Garrison raised his hand and said, $612. Gerald Pratt, without hesitation, raised his paddle and said, $180,000. Wade Garrison stood up. He opened the briefcase. He placed on the table in front of Clive Sorensen the following items: Clyde Garrison's grazing ledger, 1908 to 1947, the 1953 county resurvey document with its explicit linkage of parcel numbers, a copy of the 1929 statute, a copy of the Halverson decision, and a 2-page summary prepared by Attorney Renfro citing the precedence clause and the documentation requirements. He said, quietly, I am filing a prior use precedence claim under the 1929 statute. The documentation is in order. The room was still. Gerald Pratt leaned over to one of his colleagues. They spoke in low voices. Pratt then addressed Sorensen directly and said that the precedence clause was an archaic provision that had never been applied, and that his company's bid of $180,000 represented significant economic benefit to the region and the state. Sorensen spent 22 minutes reviewing the documents. He asked Wade 2 questions about the ledger, specifically whether the entries could be authenticated and whether Wade had standing as a direct heir of the documented user. Wade answered both questions without raising his voice. Sorensen ruled in Wade Garrison's favor under the Agricultural Precedence Clause. The bid was accepted at $612. Northwest Mineral did not pursue further legal action. Their Calgary attorneys reviewed the statute and the documentation and advised against litigation. The parcel was transferred to Wade Garrison Sr. in December of 1973. 4 months after the auction, a man named Dwight Calloway, who ran cattle on the adjacent section and had called Wade Ledger Wade more than once, walked across the fence line to where Wade was checking the condition of the river quarters northeast Calais. Calloway stood with his hands in his coat pockets and looked at the ground, and then looked at Wade and said, "What are you going to do with it?" It was not quite a question. Wade told him he was going to put Herefords on it the following spring and let them work the grass for a season before he made any other decisions. Calloway walked away without saying more. Over the next several years, other ranchers came by. A few asked about the precedence clause. One young man from the county extension office came with a soil probe and a clipboard and took 12 core samples from across the parcel. His name was Henrik Rouse, and he was working in conjunction with a range ecologist from the University of Montana named Dr. Ann Steele, who arrived in June of 1975 with additional equipment. Dr. Steele's measurements, submitted in a formal report to the Montana Department of Natural Resources in August of 1975, found the following. Soil organic matter in the river quarter benchland had recovered to 4.7%, compared to a regional average of 2.9%. The native grass cover, primarily blue bunch wheatgrass and green needlegrass, had reestablished across 91% of the parcel surface, and the riparian buffer along the Marias River frontage showed active root mat regeneration at a depth of 14 inches. Dr. Steele and Henrik Rouse sat at Wade Garrison's kitchen table for 1 hour and 40 minutes that evening. Dr. Steele said the parcel was one of the most intact native benchland sites remaining in Pondera County. She said it plainly, as a finding, not a compliment. In 1981, Wade Garrison Sr. donated the river quarter, parcel 1477R, 480 acres, to the Pondera County Conservation District, to be held in perpetuity as the Garrison Memorial Grazing Trust. The trust agreement specified managed rotational grazing, permanent protection of the riparian corridor along the Marias, and public access for educational and agricultural research purposes. Wade was 79 years old when he signed the documents. In the spring of 1981, a letter arrived from Northwest Mineral Corporation. Not from Gerald Pratt, who had retired 2 years earlier, but from a junior land acquisitions associate named Douglas Fenn. The letter expressed interest in discussing potential mineral rights arrangements on the parcel now that its conservation status had been established. Douglas Fenn knocked on Wade Garrison's door on a Tuesday in April. Young, in a clean coat, carrying a folder. Wade opened the door. He looked at Douglas Fenn. He did not invite him in. He did not raise his voice. He did not gloat. He said, "The land is in trust. It's not mine to discuss. That's who you want to talk to." He handed Fenn a business card for the Pondera County Conservation District and closed the door. That was the end of it. She did not gloat. He did not raise his voice. Wade Garrison Sr. lived until 1987. He was 85. In his last years, he had three things he said, in various orders, depending on the occasion. He said, "The grass knows more than the map does." He said, "Patience is not waiting. It is preparation that looks like waiting." He said, "A record kept, honestly, is a kind of prayer." The agrarian philosopher Wendell Berry once wrote that, "The care of the earth is our most ancient and most